Today's daf we're going to be learning today is Shevuot daf Kavav. Today we're going to get started at the very top of our daf. Today's daf is sponsored by Tali Oberman in honor of her grandmother Miriam Sklar, who has reached the incredible milestone of 90. Mazal tov. Okay, we're starting with Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva. We've seen their machloket a bunch of times already, and now we're going to have a more, we already, in the Mishnah, already had a bit more of an expanded version of their machloket because we had a bit of conversation between the two of them, but this braita is going to have even more conversation between them. We're going to see where each one gets their approach from, why. Let's just go back to the basic machloket. Rabbi Akiva thinks the vows are also on the past, and Rabbi Yishmael says, no, we're only talking about literally what it says on the pasuk, lehara or lehetiv, to yes, do good, or to not do good, and that is also, right, so that's only for the future. Okay, that's Rabbi Yishmael. So now we start with Tanu Rabbanan. Here's our braita. Lahara o lehitiv. Ein li ela dvarim sheyesh behem hara'a v'hatava. Lahara o lehitiv is only things that have hara'a v'hatava. Now there's two issues, right? Number one is the pasuk only talks about future and only talks about to do good or to do bad. She'ein behem hara'a v'hatava minayin. Where do we get that if it doesn't have hara'a v'hatava? Talmud Lamal. O nefesh kichi shava levatei b'sfatayim. Now, how do we know that if it's not only, let's say, right, to do good or to do bad means it's got, or to do bad or to do good according to the order in the pasuk, it means it has to have some sort of meaning, an action that has meaning, either don't do it or yes, do it. But what about actions that have no meaning? We talked about this yesterday. Like if I say I'm going to throw a rock into the sea. Talmud Lomal, O nefesh kichi shava levatei b'sfatayim. Well, now, and maybe now is a good time to go back and read the entire pasuk, because by the end of today, we're going to darshan most of the phrases in this pasuk. So the pasuk is in Vayikra chapter 5, verse 4. O nefesh, ki tishava levatei b'sfatayim. So a person who takes an oath with their lips, we'll get back to that later, right, to express with their lips, lehara o lehitiv, to do bad or to do good, lechol asher yivatei ha'adam b'shvuah, for anything that a person expresses in an oath. Notice this is kind of like a klal, prat to klal. It starts off very generally. Anything you express with your lips, then it gives you the specifics, lahara uleitiv, and then it says, but anything really, right? Anything that you would express. So therefore, how do we know that it also includes things that aren't really significant, like I will throw a rock into the sea? Because it says, "O nefesh kichi shavala b'sfatayim." Okay, that includes anything, including even if it has no purpose. Okay, eli ela lahaba, but still lahara uleitiv is future. L'shaval minayin. How do we know? It's also if I said I didn't eat yesterday or I did eat yesterday. Talmud Lomal lechol asher yivatei ha'adam b'shvuah. That's from that, right? That part of the pasuk. So we had O nefesh kichu shabbat levatei, which is the beginning of the pasuk, which is a general. That includes even things that aren't significant at all, aren't lahara uleitiv. And then the second phrase that comes after lahara uleitiv, or really the third phrase in the pasuk, lechol asher yivatei adam b'shvuah, comes to include also past. And obviously this is, as we're going to see right now, Divrei Rabbi Akiva. It's obviously Rabbi Akiva's approach because Rabbi Yishmael doesn't think that those cases are included. So that gets you our Rabbi Akiva approach. We have a general in the beginning, which includes things that aren't significant. We have a general at the end, which includes also past. Rabbi Yishmael Omer, lahara uleitiv lahaba. Okay, lahara uleitiv is obviously future. And zeu, that's what Rabbi Yishmael says. We're going with lahara uleitiv. It's on the future, not on the past. Amar lo Rabbi Akiva. So now we get into a conversation. Rabbi Akiva says to Rabbi Yishmael, Imken, if you're going to take hara uleitiv so literally, and it's only going to be what's hara uleitiv, then how could you include throwing a stone, which has no significance? Where do you get that things that aren't part of to do good or to do bad, meaning useless actions? If I take an oath about a useless action, how do you know that's included as well? You seem to take hara uleitiv super literally. Amar lo mi ribui katuv. So Rabbi Yishmael, and we met this phrase in the Mishnah already, said, well, there's a general reference in the pasuk, okay, from the general reference. He doesn't specify whether he means the beginning one or the end one, right? The first or the third phrase in the pasuk, but basically saying, oh, there's a general, right? It gets general. Probably he means what they seem to say is he means the one after la ra'u. It then says lechol asher yivatei adam shvuah. That includes more things. What does it include? Things that don't have any value or significance. Amar. So Rabbi Akiva says, I don't get it then. Im riba katuv lekach, riba katuv lekach. If you're saying that there's generalization in that pasuk, which is including more things, well, then let it include past also. Period. End of discussion. End of braita. So now the question is, right, well, does Rabbi Yishmael have a retort to this? Right, Rabbi Yishmael doesn't really answer here. And not only that, but the Gemara says, Shapir Kamar le Rabbi Akiva le Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Akiva had a pretty valid point, right? It seems pretty arbitrary. And if you're going to already say it's not only la ra'u leitiv, why don't you go past tense as well? So now we're going to have Rabbi Yochanan, who's going to come to try to explain Rabbi Yishmael. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. And he goes back, okay? He goes back to who they studied from. Okay, Rabbi Yishmael sheshimesh Rabbi Nechunia ben Akana shaya doresh et kol haTorah kula b'prat u'klal prat ihunami doresh b'klal prat. So Rabbi Yishmael went by his teacher Rabbi Nechunia ben Akana, who had a particular approach, and he had the same approach as his rabbi, which was he darshaned the whole Torah in klal prat methodology. Rabbi Akiva, Shishimesha, Nachum Ish Gamzu. Remember Gamzu Latova, right? The guy who says, oh, everything's for the good. He got stuck in that situation. We have the whole story. Anyway, that was his teacher. Okay, he wasn't just the guy who had this crazy story happen and kept saying Gamzu Latova, but he was also the rabbi of Rabbi Akiva. And how did he darshan the Torah? It's interesting. We always talk about the difference of approach of the exegetical approach of Rabbi Yishmael versus Rabbi Akiva, and they have different methodologies completely, right? They have different hermeneutic principles, but really it's their rabbis. It's not just them, okay? They each came from their rabbis. Shaya doresh et kol haTorah kula b'riba u'miyut, and therefore iunami doresh riba u'miyut, and therefore he was in the approach of the ribui and miyut. Okay? Remember the difference between klal prat klal and ribui and miyut? If you don't, it's okay. We're going to go over it again. But klal prat klal, you can already say. If it's Rabbi Yishmael, then it's more specific. We're going to say, oh, it's only similar to what the prat is. And if you go by ribui and miyut, you're going to include many more things. And we're going to say, we'll be miyut a little bit, but we're generally going to include a lot more cases. If already we're on this topic of each one learning from the rabbi, that's something I want to talk about. First of all, Shuli Mishka wrote in Flashback this week specifically about Nachum Ish Gamzu, and also about his name, by the way. We all call him Gamzu because, right, we know it's Gamzu Latova, but there's a claim that it's really, he was from the place Gimzu, okay, and that his name was also from there. Oftentimes you see names are darshaned for other ways, but a bit of background about him, a bit of background of Rabbi Nechunia ben Akana. But I really wanted to use this opportunity to talk about a new book that came out. I mentioned, I think, after class more, but those book Chachamim. And in other words, why it's always important to know who studied with whom. We're going to see later Abai getting into an argument, into a debate with Rav Yosef, and Rav asking questions of Rav Nachman, because Abai had studied mainly under Rav Yosef, Rav studied mainly also under Rav, also under Rav Nachman. It's important to know who people's teachers were because that affects their approach, and it's important to understand the difference with their approaches. And what's amazing about this book Chachamim, which just came out, the 6th volume, okay, there's 5 volumes already out. All of them are translated into English. This, Bezrat Hashem, will be translated into English. I don't have a date when, but at some point it will be. This is on the 3rd and 4th generation of Moraim, and it's really interesting because it's Rabbah, Rav Yosef, Abai, Rava, Rabbi Yirmiyah, people that we meet all the time in the Gemara. They're really like the central period of the Gemara. I happen to have written the intro to the book, so you can also read that, which is nice. So it's a great book, and after reading it, it's really affected how I learn, really, because the more you understand about the life of these people and the difference in approaches of the people, and this is really one of the main systematic approach books where Rabbi Lau really tries to analyze the different approaches of what makes Rava different from Abai. One of the fascinating things to say about Rava and Abai, by the way, which I have to share, is that we always imagine Rava and Abai talking to each other all the time. And Rabbi Lau basically claims that it's very rare that they actually met. Okay, again, all of this is really conjecture, but based on evidence, by things that we could find in the Gemara, textual support for it, he claims that they very rarely met in person, right? And they were rabbis in totally different places, and we always view them as, kind of like Havrutot arguing. No, they really didn't, which is really interesting, and basically discusses, there's about 100 pages on Abaye and Rava alone, and discusses, number one, discusses them separately. This is Rava's approach, this is Abaye's approach, this is who they were influenced by, this is their difference. This is their approach, and then compares Abaye to Rabba. Very, very fascinating. Okay, with that being said, and anyone who's in Israel and is around Ranana or wants to be around Ranana on Tuesday night, there's a book launch in Matana Sharon, and Rav Lau will be speaking there, and also his son, Rav Yedidia, who helped him write the book, and I'll also be speaking. So it's just if you want to come and join. Okay, I'll be speaking about Rabbi Yirmiyah, a famous favorite character of mine. Okay, in all that being said, let's get back to our Gemara. So why did I talk about this? Because it's really interesting when you see who is influenced by whose approach. So now, and it's, yes, next Tuesday night, right after Shevuot. Okay, so here goes. We have a klal of prat to klal, or ribui miyut ribui. Remember, whenever we compare these, they both think the same pasuk, the same words are the general, the same words are the specifics. It's just they call it something else, and it has different meaning in terms of how inclusive or exclusive it is. So let's start reading inside. So we already saw in the pasuk that there's a generalization, right? A general thing, specific, and a general. So let's go through. My Rabbi Akiva. So what's Rabbi Akiva's approach? The darish ribui miyut. How do we know that? Tanya, here we go with a braita. Oh, nefesh kiti shava riba. That's the general. Anyone who takes any sort of oath. Lehara or lehitiv mi'et. Then we get a specific example or a type, I would say. Then lechol asher yivatei adam chazar v'riba. We have again a general. Riba mi'et v'riba, riba hakol. So when you do a ribui miyut ribui, first you say, okay, well the ribui at the end comes to include everything. So my riba kol mile. So we basically include all oaths. Umay mi'et, but wait, there is a miyut. So what does it mean, all oaths? Well, not just la'arau leitiv, future, also past, and not just la'arau leitiv if it has some sort of meaning or use or something, but even totally meaningless oaths. And there must be some miyut, though, because there is a miyut in the pasuk. You can't ignore that. Well, mi'et devar mitzvah. If it's a mitzvah, remember we learned already, you can't take an oath against a mitzvah. That's what it's coming to exclude. Rabbi Yishmael darish klal prat. Oh, nefesh kitu shaval v'teves fatayim klal. La'arau leitiv prat l'cholashay v'tei adam chazar v'kalal. That's our same. It's just instead of saying ribui miyut ribui, we have klal prat klal. Klal prat klal. What's the rule? Yetadan ela ke'ena prat. We're only going to include things that are similar to the detail. Ma prat b'farash lehaba. So the detail is about the future. Av kol lehaba. So obviously we're only going to talk about future vows. Now they say, okay, but ahane klale, but there is still the generalization. So what's the generalization coming to say? Afilu dvarim she'em behem hara'ava tava lehaba. Even things that aren't necessarily to, yes, do something good, not do something right, to do something bad, meaning even not only things that have significance, but even things like throwing stones. And that's what the klal comes to include. And but only for future. I will throw a rock, obviously, because no past vows are included ever. And the prat comes to say, but not anything in the past, even if it is, I will eat or I won't eat, right? It has value. But if it's on the past, it's not included. Okay, that's how Rabbi Yishmael darshes. Now, the obvious question to Rabbi Yishmael is, Ipuchana, why don't we flip it? Why are you including that case and excluding that case? Why including the I'll throw a stone in the river, and you're not including past? Sounds a little arbitrary. So we're going to have two possible answers. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Jumia de lahara o lehetiv. It has to be more similar if we're going to include something more similar to lahara o lehetiv. What would that be? Well, lahara o lehetiv, what's it forbidden for? By what pasuk do we forbid lahara o lehetiv? If I do a vow in the future, I say I will do something, and then I don't fulfill it. Well, that's mishisuro mishum bal yachel dvaro. Yatzda zo she'en isuro mishum bal yachel dvaro ela mishum bal tishakru. He says if we're going to include something, it should be from the same prohibition. The prohibition of not keeping your vow that you said you're going to do something is lo yachel dvaro. You said you're going to do something, you keep to your word. That's not the same as I swore yesterday I ate when I didn't. That's a lie. That's what sheker. Don't lie. Okay. So if we're going to include something, we're going to include a vow that has to do with the future, like it doesn't have significance, but it is still lo yachel dvaro. I said I'm going to throw the stone into the river and I don't. So that we're going to include, but we're not going to include something that has a totally different prohibition. If I stand up now and I say, I swear I ate yesterday and I lied, that's that's a lie. That's not, I didn't keep my word. So that's why it makes sense that one and not that one. That's the first answer. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Abin Amar, Amakha, the pasuk says, O nefesh ki tishava levate b'sfatayim. Mish, okay, this is a very difficult drasha to understand. Okay, first of all, it's definitely not the simple reading. Second of all, we're going to take the word bitoy, which is an expression, and we're going to basically interchange it with ma'aseh, action. Okay, maybe because when you take the oath, the action you're doing is you're saying a word, but it's not really an action. And you'll see what we're going to do in a minute. Look at the order in the pasuk. Okay, we're darshaning which word appears before what, and because of that, we're going to say which thing has to happen before what in order to be liable. It says nefesh ki tishava, to take the oath, and then it says levate. Levate, if we understand it as an action, which is difficult in and of itself because it's not an action, but okay. If we say levate is the action, then I mean, again, it's sort of an action because in the Shevuot, the action is when you take the vow, but it's not the action of going against your vow, which is what we're going to say it is. So you need a case where misha shvuah kodemet lebitoy. The shvuah has to come before the bitoy. Now, again, the bitoy is the action. So your oath has to come before the action when you transgress the oath. That would be in future. I will do something, and then later happens the doing of it. Velosha bitoy kodemet l'shvuah. But because of the order in the pasuk, the bitoy comes after the shvuah. So if the bitoy happens first, meaning the action of eating, I ate yesterday, and then I came and I took an oath and I said, I swear I didn't eat yesterday. That already, the action happened already yesterday. Well, that's not there. Yatzazeh, right? So because of that, yatzazeh achalti v'lo achalti shamaseh kodem l'shvuah. If I say I ate or I didn't eat, well, the action happened already before the oath, and because of the order of the words in the pasuk, again, assuming bitoy is action, shvuah comes before the action. That's a bit of a hard drasha to swallow, but it's in the world of drashot, lots of things are allowed. Tanu Rabbanan. Now we're going to have another braita which darshans other words in that pasuk. Now again, it says l'chol asher yivateh ha'adam b'shvuah. So now we're going to darshan those two words, ha'adam b'shvuah. Ha'adam b'shvuah prat la'anus. The words ha'adam b'shvuah. Now you have to be a person who takes an oath, or a human, you could call it. Now a human is someone who employs their intellect, right? That's one of the things that makes a human unique. Now, if you are anus and you weren't using your intellect because you had no control over it, and you weren't using your adam, okay, what makes you a human, then it's not ha'adam b'shvuah. So if somehow you got to you didn't do your oath because you were anus, like you were forced not to do it, or you were in a situation you completely, for really nothing of your own doing, well, that's not ha'adam b'shvuah. It has to be that the person was somehow somewhat liable in what happened. And that we learn from the word ha'adam juxtaposed to the word b'shvuah. Now, the next words in the pasuk are v'ne'elam. Okay, now the pasuk says, and this is clear, this isn't even a drasha, ne'elam mimenu. When are you liable, the korban olev yoreh, the sliding scale offering? When you forget you took the oath, right? If I intentionally go against my oath, I'm not liable. This, by the way, sounds like your miklat, right? When you go to the refuge city, not when you're onus, not when you're mazid, but when you're in the middle, when you're shogeg, meaning you forgot and you kind of should have remembered, but it wasn't intentional, but it also wasn't beyond your control. Mimenu, because it says v'ne'elam mimenu. What do we darshan from mimenu? Shenitalma mimenu shvuah. They say, what did you forget? You forgot your oath. That's the part that you forgot. What if you forgot the object that you took the oath about? Talmud Lomal, b'shvuah v'ne'elam. Because it says, now, this is a good example where they do a drasha, where there's a comma between the two phrases, but they joined it together anyway because the words are next to each other. Again, let's read the second part of the pasuk. L'chol asher yivateh adam b'shvuah, anything that a person expresses in an oath, v'ne'elam mimenu, and then they forget. But when they say ne'elam mimenu, the person forgets what? The thing we just said a second ago, the shvuah, not the chefetz. Okay. What this means is not really clear. And in fact, we're going to try to figure out later what it means. And the Gemara is even going to struggle. It's not even going to be clear. We're going to have an answer to this question. What does it mean to forget your oath and not forget the object? But don't think about it yet, because the Gemara is going to get into it. Right now, we're just in the braita that's setting up the ground rules. So you're only liable if you forgot the oath, not if you forgot the object on which you took the oath about. So we'll have to figure that out. So now we're going to figure out a bunch of things about this braita. So the first thing we're going to figure out is what is anus, okay? Right? It was hard for me to define it because it's not really clear to define what is anus in an oath. So now we're going to have an example. I can ask you after if you really think this is anus or not. Okay. Hadran b'shvuah prat lanus. Hechidami. What's the case? Well, they give a case, which actually is quoted in a bunch of different places also. Comes up in, I remember there's also some Tosfots to talk about this. It's a very interesting case. Kidi Rav Kahana v'Rav Asi. So we have a case of Rav Kahana and Rav Asi, two students of Rav. Ki havu kaime mekame de Rav. When they would get up from the Shiur and leave the Beit Midrash, Mar Amar Shvuata dahachi Amar Rav. One would say, I swear that this is what Rav said. Umar Amar Shvuata dahachi Amar Rav. And the other would say, I swear this is what Rav said. Okay, basically they walk out of the Beit Midrash, listen to the same Shiur. One says this is what Rav said. One said that's what Rav said. They start arguing, and this one says, I swear I'm right. And the other one says, I swear I'm right. Well, the next morning they go to the Beit Midrash. They ask Rav who was right, and he says, "You were right." Okay, let's say he says to Rav Kahana. So Amalei, Idach, Rav Asi says to him, "Va'ana b'shikrish debate. Did I just swear falsely because I thought you said something else?" Amar le libach ansach. Your heart forced you to say what you said. In other words, you really believed it was true. When you really believe something is true, that you swore about it, you were so convinced you were right, that is onus. This is interesting because shouldn't you have listened better, right, and avoided getting into a Shevuot checker? It's a bit of a crazy situation that, why was it okay for them? That one of the questions they ask about this is they both knew that one of them was lying when they took the oath because one said Rav said no, one said Rav said yes, and they were saying completely opposite, right? First of all, there's a fascinating thing in general, how two people sit in the same class and come out with opposite say different things, which always happens because we all kind of read into what people say, what we want people to say. And all over the Gemara, we see it. This one said in the name of Rav this, and that one said in the name of Rav Yad, or this one said Rav said this, and this one said Rav said that. And we're constantly going through statements like that. So clearly this kind of thing did happen. What's really interesting to say here is that because you really believe that this was the case, and right, that's what you're writing, Becky, I see, right? It's not considered Shevuot checker. But that's what he means, libcha nascha. You were so convinced that that was right. He doesn't care that, maybe you weren't listening well enough in the shiur, maybe you dozed at that point. But at that moment, you really believed so strongly that you were telling the truth. And therefore, it's not a Shevuot checker. What's really interesting about this situation is that it seems like this was a regular thing that they did, that these two rabbis would come out and, fight and then take an oath about it. And somehow it seems like it's okay when, in general, we try to avoid Shevuot checker as best as we can. But he says that's onus. Okay, moving on. Ne'elam mimenu, shenit'alem mimenu shvuah. Yachol shenit'alem mimenu chefetz. Talmud lomar b'shvuah v'ne'elam mimenu helem shvuah chayav ve'eno chayav al helem chefetz. So, the first reaction to this braita is the rabbis in Israel. Machachu alei b'ma'arava. They mock this braita and said this braita makes absolutely no sense. B'ishlam hashvuah mishkach ala b'lo chefetz. I get that you can have an oath, forget the oath, and remember the object. What would be a case of that? Kigon de'amal shvuah shelo ochal pat chitim v'kasavul she'ochal ka'amal. I remembered I took an oath about bread. I just don't remember, did I say I won't eat it, or did I say I will eat it? In other words, I said I won't eat it, and I forgot that I actually said I will eat it. So I made a mistake about the oath, but I knew the object was wheat, pat kitim, bread made of wheat. Dishvuate inshe, I forgot the oath, chef tzedachir, but I remembered it was about the bread of the chitim. What's the case of an object without the oath? Because what we're basically going to prove is, if I forget the object, that basically means I forgot my oath. Okay, so let's see. If I think I took an oath that I won't eat wheat bread, But real, what happened? Sorry, I took an oath that I won't eat wheat bread, but I thought that I said barley bread. Right? Here I remembered I took the oath. I just got confused about what it was. Okay, that doesn't sound so complicated. No, this is not good because why? Since I forgot the object I took the oath about, in the end, Hainu helim shvua. If I went and ate that bread, it means I forgot I took an oath about eating bread, right? Because I ate the bread that was made of wheat. Because I thought that my oath was about barley, but in the end, I really forgot about my oath. Because the oath is all about me, not about a chayfetz. This is why it becomes very difficult. Since the oath is about me, I can't eat bread that's made of wheat. And I thought I said barley. So when I go and eat the wheat bread, I basically forgot that I took an oath that I won't eat bread. So wheat bread. So basically, that doesn't really any forgetting the object is going to be really forgetting the oath. Ella Amar Rabbi Elazar. So what's Rabbi Elazar's reaction? Who actually was also from Israel. Da v'da achati. It's really one and the same. Helim chayfetz is helim shvua. There's no such thing. This braita is a mistake. Matkevla Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef attacks us and says, "What do you mean? Alama? Okay, it might say alma in your Gemara. It should be alama. Alama chayfetz v'lo shvua lo mishkachla. Why do you say there's no chayfetz without shvua? I'll give you a case. V'hamishkachala kigon da'amal shvua shelo chal pat chitim. Okay, I said I won't eat bread made of wheat. Boshit gadol asal litol pat soim. I put my hand in a basket. I go to get bread made of barley. V'alta biyado shel chitim. But by accident, I pick wheat bread. So there." I remembered my oath. I remembered it was about wheat bread. I just made a mistake about the object here. And I thought that what I was eating was barley. That sounds good. Because of course, meat, right? I thought it was barley, and I ate it. I remembered the shvua. I had a mistake about the object that I'm eating. That makes sense. However, Amar le Abai, here comes the Rav Yosef Abai. So Abai's student says to him, Klum chayevet lekorban el amai detafes biyade helim shvuahu. In the end, I didn't take an oath. In other words, what happens when I eat that bread that I think is barley? I'm basically forgetting that I took an oath on this bread. In the end, it's the oath that's getting me into trouble. And the fact that I said I won't eat the bread. So in the end, it's really a problem of, in other words, I remembered in the end that, in other words, I didn't, why am I chayav? Because I'm chayav a korban on what is in my hand. And basically, when I eat that wheat bread, thinking it's barley, I think there's no oath on it. So in the end, it's like forgetting the oath. It's the oath that I really don't forget, that I don't know about, because I don't think that the oath is on this. So in the end, Abai says there's no such thing. Lishana Achrina, there's a different version where Abai basically says the same thing to Rav Yosef, but now the Gemara is going to bring a possible retort that Rav Yosef could have said. And then we're going to end with maybe there is a possible case where this would work. Amalei Abai Rav Yosef, and here this is really the same thing, he just says it in different words. Abai says to Rav Yosef, and we assume Rav Yosef says there is a case, and then like before, Abai says to Rav Yosef, Sof korban dekamaytele, deha pat miat helim shvuahu. Okay, in the end, you are going to bring a korban because this pot, on this bread, basically you have a helim shvuah. It's the same thing. You basically forgot that you had an oath on this bread because you thought it was some other kind of bread. For Rav Yosef Amar Lechana, this isn't Rav Yosef answering. This is, according to this version, someone came up with an answer that they could put in Rav Yosef's mouth. That's what it means, Amar Lecha. We can suggest that Rav Yosef could say, Kevan dechiyada lechitin hu, parish mine helim chefetzu. Rav Yosef could say like this. When you pick up, going back to Rav Yosef's case, you pick up the loaf of bread that you think is barley, but it really is pat chitin. You can call this, I forgot the object. Why? Because if someone were to tell you this is pat chitim, you would stop. Because you remember the shvuah, and you remember it was about bread that was chitim. It's just you think that you're not eating pat chitim. You think you're eating barley bread, but in fact, it's really wheat bread. So if someone says that's wheat bread, not barley bread, you'll immediately stop. So that's not helim shvuah. That's helim chefetz, because your mistake was all about the object. And therefore, in the end, we do find a case according to this version. Now we get to Rav and Rav Nachman. Ba'amine Rav and Rav Nachman, just to mention something from the book, because why not? So when he has a whole section, obviously, Rav Asa, Rav Nachman, because Rav Nachman was his rabbi, and he talks about the difference between like in his youth and in his later, right? Later, like Rav Nachman would rule on cases and Rav would question a lot. Here we're going to see Rav questions a little, but he does say like Rav asks Rav Nachman a lot of questions. And like just kind of, what's this, what's that, what's that. And that's really what we have here, which he claims, usually more in his youth, when it was more asking questions rather than arguing back things. Here we'll see kind of maybe both types, but Bamine, because the first one, Rav is actually going to respond, but it could be he was still young when he said this. Bamine Rav Nachman. So Rav asked Rav Nachman the following question. Helem zeb, right? It just allows you to kind of see these people as, it's not just, okay, someone asked someone a question, but, oh, wait, this was the student, this was the teacher, right? And then you understand. So Rav asked his teacher, Rav Nachman, Helem zeb yadomah. What if you forget? Okay, now we had this sugya by Yediot Tuma. Remember, according to Rabbi Akiva, Yediot Tuma is only shtayim, not shtayim shem arba. There's only helim tuma, not helim mikdash. And we asked the exact same question. If you think there's only helim tuma and there's no helim mikdash, then what if you forgot both of them? Okay, if it's helim mikdash, you'll be patur. If it's helim tuma, you'll be chayav. So same question here. Helim zev yadomau. Right. Once you say that it's only helim shvuah, it's not helim chayfetz, because of the shvuah v'ne'elam. What if you have both? Amarle, hare. So Rav Nachman answers, it's the exact same sugya. Hare, helim shvuah biyado v'chayav. Well, you have helim shvuah, so of course you're going to be liable. You forgot the shvuah. So Adrabah, Rava says here, he argues a little bit back. Hare helim chayfetz biyado patur. But since you forgot the object, that actually exempts you, so maybe you should have an exemption. Rav Ashi, so Rav Nachman doesn't answer that, and Rav Ashi comes later and says, Chazina, imach mat shvuah, kaparish hare helim shvuah biyado v'chayav. What made the person stop? Was it when you said, do you know you took an oath about this? Or do you know this is bread that's made of wheat? Okay. And then if the person said, oh no, I forgot that I took an oath about bread of wheat, or I forgot, right? So then it's the bread. When he heard the bread, that's what made the person stop. So the Gemara says, Ravina says back, no, that's not proof. Because Amalei Ravina Ravashi, Klum Parish Mishvua, Mishum Chevetz, Klum Parish Mechevetz, Mishum Shvua. When I get reminded and you say to me, you know that this is wheat bread, and I say, oh, no, I took an oath on that. Well, I remembered the oath then, and I remember the bread. It's not because the bread made me stop. It's that I remember both the bread and the oath. So that doesn't prove anything because it's not necessarily the reason, right? I need both in order to do that. Ela loshna, really, it's unclear what would be the halacha if I forgot both that and that. The second question of Rava to Rav Nachman. Ba'amine Rav Nachman turning out on the bet. Ezu hi shigigat shvuat bitoy l'shaval. What's a case of shogeg? In a minute, we're going to see why this is a complicated question, why he asked this. What's a case of accidentally if I took an oath on the past? So according to Rabbi Akiva, if I take an oath that I ate and I really didn't eat, I'll be liable. Okay, but what's the case? It can't be honest, it can't be mazid. Well, ida yada, if I knew that I took an oath that I didn't eat yesterday, and I knew that I ate yesterday. So that's mazid, right? I'm obviously intentional at that point. Ida lo yada, if I didn't know, then anasu. If I didn't know, then in other words, when I took the oath, if I didn't remember that I ate yesterday, and I say, I swear I didn't eat yesterday. Well, that's anus. That's like the rabbis. They were sure they were telling the truth. That's anus. Amar le, so Rav Nachman answers him, Ba'omer, Yodea ani sheshvuah zo asura, aval eni yodea im chayavin alei korban olav. It's shogeg if I forget that I'm going to be liable a korban. I remember that I took the oath. I remember that I ate yesterday. But I didn't remember that if I take an oath that I don't eat, that I say I'm not going to eat, I'm going to have to bring a korban. That's what we're saying. There's shogeg about the korban. I don't remember the punishment. Now, there's a whole debate in Masechet Shabbat about this. What's usually shogeg of Shabbat? If I either don't remember it's Shabbat, because let's say I'm in a place where I lost track of the days and I don't remember it's Shabbat, or I don't remember that the malacha is forbidden. Okay, I learned the lamitet malachot, but I forgot one of them, or whatever it is, or I don't know this action comes under that malacha. So that's shigiga. But there's a machloka between mumbas and the rabbis. What if I forget that if I do this, then I'll be liable a punishment or a korban or something like that? Okay, so if I forget that I'm going to bring a korban on this, if I do this action unwittingly, then right? If I forgot that there's a korban, am I considered shogeg? So Mumba says yes. The rabbis say no, that's not shogeg. It's like your fault. You're an idiot. What do you mean you didn't know what the punishment was? You didn't study. Okay, that's like a basic. You should know that. So if basically Rav Nachman explains this shigigat shvuah bitoy l'shaval is if I forgot about the punishment, whether I'm liable a korban or not. Kiman kimumbaz seems to only match Mumbaz's approach. Damar shigagat korban shma shgaga, because he considers that shgaga. But now the Gemara says, no, afilu tema rabbanan, we could distinguish between Shabbat and here for a very simple reason. Ad kan lo pliga rabbanan ale demumbaz ela b'chol Torah kula tilav chidushu. In all of the Torah, now what he means really is in all korbanot chatat, okay, all korbanot chatat except for this one, are basically, when do you bring a korban chatat? We've learned this before, and if not, we're going to learn it in the first Mishnah in Kritut, that when you do a sin, that if you did it intentionally, you would get karet, and if you do it accidentally, right, you're going to be obligated to korban. That's when you're obligated to korban chatat. That's the regular chatat kfu'ah, we call it, right, that we've been comparing to the korban olevi ored, the one that has to be an animal offering. There's no sliding scale offering. That's your classic. We always use chelev as the example. Chelev, if I eat chelev, I'll be chayav karet. If I do it unwittingly, I'll have to bring a korban chatat. So you can't say, oh, I didn't know about Shabbat, because everyone knows Shabbat is karet. And everyone knows then that you bring a korban, because you always bring a korban when it's karet. But here, hacha de chidushu, here there's a unique halacha. It's a chidush, meaning it's the only case, we don't generally have just a negative prohibition. There's no karet. If I intentionally go against my vow, I don't get karet. It's just I transgressed. Lo yachel dvaro, don't not keep your word. Or on the l'sha'avar, don't lie in vain. Or don't lie falsely, Don't lie falsely. So, since this is a unique situation, you're not necessarily expected to know it. And if you claim, I didn't know I had to bring a korban, we can put that under shgaga. Okay, dialfin. And now, why is it so clear with all the other cases? Dialfin avodah zarah, because they learned it all from the case of avodah zarah, where there it's clear. There's a special pasuk that talks about the korban chatat by worshiping idols, and there, if you do it intentionally, you get karet. So therefore, they learn all the other cases from there, and therefore this is unique. And therefore, afilu rabbanan modu. Okay, the fact that here we're bringing a korban is a unique halacha, and therefore even the rabbis who disagree on Shabbat don't think that would be called shgaga, would say it's called shgaga here. It's fascinating about what they assume people should know and shouldn't know, according to this sugya. Ba'mine Ravina me Rava. Nishba ala kikal. So Ravina now asks Rava a question. You take an oath about a loaf of bread. I won't eat this, bread. Umistaken alehama. And then you have to eat that bread. Otherwise, I don't know, you're going to die, you're going to get sick, you're going to this. Can you eat it? So Rava says, mistaken, mishrei mal. If you pikuach nefesh is docha everything. So either, undo your Shevuot, get it undone, or if it's so desperate, eat it right then if you're going to die. Of course you can eat it. Ella, so he modifies the question, Ravina. He says, Ella mitzta'el. What if you're really, really starving, right? Starving, starving, starving. It's the only thing in front of you. Now, you're not going to die. You're not going to get sick, but you're just unhappy about the situation right now, which basically they define as meaning, whether you remember your oath, you don't remember your oath, you're going to eat that bread anyway. You don't care. Your tsa'ar, your pain or discomfort is going to basically override any oath you took. And then you ate it, a halal b'shigat shvuah. But then when you went to eat it, you actually forgot you took an oath about it. In other words, you're so desperately wanting that bread. Okay, I think about like there's some yummy chocolate cake or I don't know what sitting in front of you and you're looking at it all the time. And you're like, I can't not eat this. I can't not eat this. I can't not eat this. And then you forget that you swore yesterday, I'm not eating chocolate cake anymore. And you basically, while you forget your oath, you eat it. So are you liable in that case? So Amarle, Rava says you're not liable. Why are you not liable? Well, because there's the whole thing about forgetting your oath, okay? And then you remember it, and that's when you have to bring a korban. It's only if, here we'll read it right now, Tanina, it says in a Tanaitic source, Shav miyadiato may be korban al shigigato, lo shav miyadiato, a may be korban al shigigato. When do you bring a korban? A korban's for atonement. Well, it's atonement when you feel bad about what you did and you say, oh, had I known, I wouldn't have done it. But we already defined this case as a case where even if you had known the oath, you would have eaten it anyway. When I ate that chocolate cake, I forgot that I had sworn off chocolate cake. But even if I had remembered, I would have gone against my vow anyway. I would have eaten it because the chocolate cake was really bothering me. So, or really enticing me, you could say. So basically, that's not a case where you bring a korban. If I would have done it anyway, even if I had remembered, even though I did forget, it doesn't make a difference. Has to be a case where if I had known, I wouldn't have done it. That's what it means, shav miyadiato. I would have changed my ways had I known. In this case, you wouldn't have, and therefore you won't be liable to korban. Again, liable to korban, this is why I keep making the comparison. And again, it's a nice connection between makot and Shevuot about the ir miklat. It's also that the korban provides you with atonement. And you don't deserve the atonement if you didn't really care about forgetting about it. Amar Shmuel, last sugya for today about what if I just think it in my heart. This is the topic of Daf Mishalahen this week, which is out in English already. You can listen. Ba'amine Ravina, Amar Shmuel, Gamar Bilibo, right? The Daf Mishalahen you can find both on our Facebook page and also on our website, and also on Beyond the Daf podcast. Amar Shmuel, Gamar Bilibo, Tzarich Shiotzi B'Sfatav. If I think it in my heart, that's not enough. According to Shmuel, I have to express it. How do we know that? Well, it's pretty clear. Again, I told you we're going to darshan almost every part of that pasuk. Shenema livate b'sfatayim. O nefesh kiti shava. You take an oath, livate b'sfatayim, to express with words, right, or with from your lips. That means to say it. If you didn't say it and you just think it, you're not liable. Meitive. But now we're going to bring a contradiction. We're going to have two difficult sources for Shmuel, but resolve them both. Bisvatayim. So here's our braita. Bisvatayim v'lo b'lev. Okay, so far that sounds good. From your mouth, but not in your heart. Gamar b'libo minayin. How do you know, though, if you just thought it in your heart that you will be liable? Okay, that seems to contradict the first line, but okay, get back to that. Talmud lomar lechol asher yivatei adam b'shvuah. Anything you express in a shvuah, anything really seems to include not even expression, but even thinking it in your heart. So first, before we get to the contradiction, hagufa kasha. Already this is a problem because amarta b'sfatayim v'lo b'lev, v'hadar amar kamar b'libo minayin. Forget about Shmuel. The braita itself makes no sense. First it says gamar b'lev doesn't count. Then it says it does. So amar Rav Shesha halu kasha. Shesha says, okay, I'll resolve the difficulty in the braita. Then we have to go back to Shmuel. B'sfatayim v'lo shegamar b'libo lahutzi b'sfatav v'lohutzi. There's two ways of gamar b'libo. One is I think to myself, later today, I'm going to take upon myself to go on a diet. Okay. And I'm going to say it. I'm going to say to everyone that I'm going on a diet, or I'm going to say out loud. You say, later I'm going, right? You decide in your heart that you're going to start a diet by expressing it in words. And then you don't. Okay. That's nothing then, because you're thinking about it. You were thinking to express, but you never finished the action. But if you did a complete action of thinking and I'm going to start a diet now, Gamar b'libo stam minayin. How do I know you'll be chayav? Talmud lomar l'chol asher yivateh. That's enough. So if I just had gemira b'lev, not that I was going to express something, that's complete. But okay, so that explains the braita. But el Shmuel kasha, it doesn't go with Shmuel, that's for sure. So Amar Rav Shesha Taritz ve'emahach. He says, fine. So in order to resolve the problem with Shmuel, though, we'll have to explain the braita differently. Bisvatayim v'lo shegamar b'libo lo tzipat chitim v'o tzipat solim. Has to be what we call pivali boshavim. What I said in my heart, what I said to myself is what I expressed. So if I plan to take upon myself not to eat bread made out of wheat, and then when I said my vow, I said bread, I won't eat bread made out of barley by accident, that's not a vow. Then I won't be obligated. Now, if I said I was going to take a vow to forbid bread made of wheat, and then when I said my vow, I said I'm forbidding bread, but I didn't say bread of wheat. Does it apply to all breads or not, right? Or does this apply at all? Yes. Talmud lomar l'chol asher yivateh adam. That's the second part. Then we can say that what I thought in my heart of only bread of wheat means that even though I said bread, I actually really meant bread of wheat. So when they don't contradict, we can use what I thought in my heart to explain what I actually meant. Meitive. But now we have a second contradiction. Okay, and then just thinking in my heart wouldn't do anything. Either which way I have to express it in words, and that fits with Shmuel. Second contradiction. Motzat vatecha tishmor vasita. Whatever you say, express in words, you have to do. And li'ela shotzi b'sfatav. This sounds like only things I expressed in words. Gamar b'libo minayin. How do you know gemira b'lev works? Talmud lomar kol nediv lev. And what are we talking about here? Talking about when everyone donated things to the temple. Anyone who is donated in their heart, that means when I want to make a donation, if I think to myself I'm going to make a donation, I have to do it. Okay? That comes from here. So that's contradiction to Shmuel, to which they answer, Shanei Atam dechtiv kol nediv lev. There it says, nediv lev, from my heart. And here it says levatei b'sfatayim. So, right, they're not the same. V'nigmar mina, but why don't we just use this as a paradigm? Once I think something in my heart, it's as if I said it. And therefore, once something appears in the Torah once, we usually say this could create a paradigm for everywhere and learn from there to Shevuot. Well, it only creates a paradigm if there aren't two cases, remember? Well, mishum dahavi truma v'kodshim shnei ktuvim habegechad. It's a bit of a debate with truma and kodshim, but let's go with Rashi. The truma is donating to the Mishkan, that we saw the pasuk already. Kodshim is sanctifying something, like for a sacrifice, for example. And they quote a pasuk in Divrei HaYamim, which is very strange because usually it's two pasukim in the Torah. Here it's in Chronicles, where it says it's about Chizkiyahu. Chizkiyahu, they had said the people came and brought tzlachim and todot, they brought sacrifices. V'chol nediv lev olot, and anyone who wanted to brought korbanot olah, burnt offerings. So now they say, there also appears nediv lev, and because it says it in two places, we have a principle. If it says it already in two places, then you can't make a paradigm because it's only in those two cases. However, there's a bit of a debate about that. Some people say two cases, yes, teaches, three doesn't. So, if you say no, they don't teach them, it's perfect, right? Oaths are one thing, all right? This doesn't contradict Shmuel. But well, then why would you learn from here to everything if you say two times actually would create a paradigm? Gemara answers, these two are in the area of the temple. Temple and outside the temple are two different things. Oaths are outside the temple. So basically, you can't learn from one to the other, and that's why we don't learn from there to here, and that's why this doesn't contradict Shmuel. So we resolve the second contradiction against Shmuel. So quick review of our daf. We started with a big debate between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva, and who learned from who, and what approach, klal, prat, ribui, and miyut, and how they got to their different approaches about oaths and what's included, what's not included. Then we went to some other drashot about not ones, not mazid, not helem chefetz. What is helem chefetz? We're not even sure we really figured that out. We did have one possible answer at the end, but it was hard to really understand. And what if you forget both, assuming there is something called helem chefetz? What if you forgot the chefetz and you forgot the shvuah? We didn't really have a conclusive answer to that either. What is shvuah shigat bitoy l'sha'avar? That we came up with a case. And then we had, what if you really, really, right, your mitzta'er? We learned now if you really didn't care about your oath, even though you forgot it, that's not shigat shvuah. You wouldn't bring a korban on that. And we ended with this mirah b'lev, which, by the way, raises, and this is what Taf Mishalahan talked about, a big difference between donating, let's say, to charity or making a donation, thinking that in your heart, which might be more obligating than in this case, where it's not, an oath is not an oath unless you express it in words. With that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a good day.